Visiting family for Christmas is supposed to be one of the most magical and exciting things this time of year, but not everyone at the Bamu family celebrations was gonna make it to New Year. So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today we're going to be talking about a murder that took place on Christmas Day. But quickly, before we get into the case, I do just want to thank our sponsors for making this video possible, Magellan TV. You guys already know that Magellan TV is my absolute favourite place to watch documentaries. It's a documentary streaming service that adds between 15 and 20 hours of new content every single week. So I'm never getting bored, you're never getting bored. There's always stuff to watch. And you guys know I love sharing my recommendations. Whenever I find a good documentary on there, I'm like, guys, come watch this. So recently, one of the new arrivals I watched was called The Big Boss. It's a 2-part series all about Paul Larue. And if you don't know who Paul Larue is, he was like a criminal mastermind of organized crime. He used to smuggle gold, drugs, weapons, anything of high value all over the world, and he was doing it for years. He made a lot of money doing it. He ran like a full empire all by himself, and he's been described as the world's most prolific yet least known crime boss, which was really interesting. I'd never actually heard of him before this documentary series, and I don't know how because he was mad. Magellan TV is completely ad-free, so you're never gonna get interrupted while you're watching your documentaries, and you can also watch them on pretty much any device that you have, so what are you waiting for? And right now, when you buy one gift card for an annual membership, you'll get another gift card for an annual membership completely free. So it's buy one, get one free. All you have to do to take advantage of that offer is go through my link, which is down below in the description of this video. Thanks again to Magellan TV for sponsoring. Now, before we get into the case, I do just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. There are some very heavy trigger warnings at the start of this case, so if any of the following themes are things that you don't think you can hear about right now, I completely understand. Click out of this video and look after yourself, but the themes are as follows. Domestic violence, torture, abuse, and murder, and a lot of the victims are children or vulnerable people. So if any of that, again, is something that you don't think you can watch right now, look after yourself. That's the most important thing. Click out and I'm sure I'll see you again some other time with a different video. But you go make yourself a cup of tea. All that being said, let's just jump into the case. Magali Bamu was 29 years old, living in Paris, France in 2010 at the time of this case. She was born on February 21st, 1983 in the country that we now know as the Democratic Republic of Congo, but at the time it was known as Zaire. And when Magali was born, Zaire was a very different place to what it is right now. At the time, it was actually under a dictatorship of President Mobutu, who was horrid. Brutal. It was a scary place to live at the time, and a lot of people were trying to flee because they didn't like this dictatorship because it was horrible. And so when Magali was 5 years old, her family actually upped and fled to Paris, France to start up a carpentry business. And they did, and they settled in pretty well into this new life. Her father was called Pierre and her mother was called Jacqueline, and after Magali, they actually went on to have a load more children. So many actually that I really struggled to find a definite number. In the aftermath of this case, a few of the younger siblings had their identities protected, and so it kind of made it hard in my research to find you a definite number. I think there were about 5 or 6 siblings though. Magali and then 5 more or 6 more. When Magali was just 13 years old, her father actually lost the carpentry business in Paris, and this new financial situation meant that they couldn't stay there anymore. They couldn't afford to live there anymore. And so Pierre and Jacqueline, her parents, moved back to Congo, and they actually sent Magali to live with relatives in London. I don't know why. I don't know why they didn't take her back home. I don't know if she had a choice in this. I really don't know the circumstances surrounding why she was sent there. But when she was, she really suffered at the hands of her new carers. She was abused by them, and she was practically forced to be like a slave, like an unpaid worker. She was like their maid. Before she arrived in London, these relatives had promised her parents that she was going to go to a good school in London, you know, she was going to get a good education. But when she arrived and she was put to this slave work, they decided that they didn't want her to go to school because that was like 6-7 hours of the day that she could be cleaning the house, that she could be doing these jobs for them. So she wasn't allowed to go to school. Instead, she was forced to stay at home, do the housework, do the cooking, do the cleaning, look after the children of the family as well. She was never allowed out. She wasn't allowed friends, really. She never really got opportunity to make any because she was never allowed out. When she became an adult, Magali managed to move herself out of this living situation, and finally things looked like they were gonna be on a good trajectory from here on because now she had control over her own life. She no longer had to answer to these abusive carers. She now had control over her own life and what she did with her days. She got herself a job as a receptionist, and then she got a few more jobs after that. I don't know why she kept losing the jobs, but they were all well-paying jobs and she seemed to do well in them. But things got even better for Magali when she met a man named Eric Bikubi. He was a sports coach, like a kid's football coach, and he was a year younger than her. The two of them shared a lot of mutual friends. I think that's how they met, and everyone told her great things about Eric. They all thought he was a great guy and she should just go for it. So the two of them began texting, and then texting turned into a few dates, and then a few dates turned into a relationship. The two of them had a lot in common. They were both actually originally from Congo, but it was Zaire at the time when both of them were born, and so they had that shared trauma because both of them had actually fled the country. Magali went to Paris, and I don't actually know where Eric went originally, but he ended up in London just like Magali did. So yeah, they both survived a lot of trauma in their life, and I think that bonded them a lot. They could really relate to each other in a place where they couldn't really relate to many people. Eric himself carried a lot of trauma just like Magali did, but for separate reasons. Obviously, Magali was abused by her guardians. She was treated as a slave. She had all that trauma, whereas Eric had a lot of trauma relating to his mother. His mother had actually died in childbirth as she was giving birth to Eric, so he never got to meet her, and he always blamed himself for that. You know, if he was never born, his mother literally would still be here, and although it's not his fault, he always felt that it was. They both confided in each other all the details of all their trauma, and this was the first time that Magali had ever found anyone that was supportive, that would listen to her, that cared about what she was saying, about all the issues in her life. He wanted to hear about it all, and she wanted to hear about his. They wanted to help each other. Magali had never had this before. I don't think Eric had really had this before, and so they were really attached to each other. Eric and Magali just seemed like such a wonderful couple together. Her family loved him, but there was a lot that they didn't know about Eric Bikubi. A lot that everyone didn't know about him, actually. Like the fact that he was suffering with psychosis and schizophrenia-like delusions. He would see things that weren't there, like rats crawling all over the floor. That was one thing that he'd seen right from being a child, actually. So he'd been having these hallucinations and delusions for a long time. But the more recent delusions that he was having as he was becoming an adult into his mid and late 20s were all surrounding a type of witchcraft named kindoki. It originates, I believe, in Congo, actually, where they were originally from. It was his uncle that taught him all about kindoki. It talks about people being possessed by evil spirits, and it's said that you can only be possessed if a witch has cast a spell on you. Actually, maybe that's not the only way. Maybe that's just one of the ways that you can get possessed by this kindoki spirit. I don't know if that's the right way of saying that exactly, but he talked about the shadow of kindoki a lot, so I don't know if that's the thing that possesses the people. But the telltale signs of kindoki possession are, well, they're all actually very normal behaviours, like biting your nails or wetting the bed for children. In children, that's one of the symptoms, but God, has every child not wet the bed at some point in their life? So there's a lot of normal behaviours that you might do in your day-to-day life, like biting your nails, that could get you accused of being possessed. So as I'm sure you can imagine, with the delusions that Eric Bikubi was having, he believed a lot of people were possessed. A lot of people that he came into contact with, he had some reason or another to believe that they were possessed. But he never realised that what he was dealing with were delusions and hallucinations. He thought that he was spiritually gifted, that he was the chosen one that could see this in people. He saw it more as a superpower rather than a mental illness. I don't think he even realized that it could be a mental illness. And he did try and get help for what he was experiencing, but it wasn't like professional psychiatric help. It was more religious help. He would travel all over London to go and see different pastors, different, knowledgeable people within his religion, and he would ask them for help, and then they'd never be able to help him because really, what does he want him to do? I don't know. They'd never be able to help him. They would just sit there and pray with him and then send him on his way because they really didn't know what was going on. They really didn't know what he was experiencing. I actually find it quite surprising that none of these pastors or whatever flagged this as delusions. Maybe it didn't sound like delusions when he was telling them about it, I don't know. But Eric's delusions were so strong at this point that I think if someone even tried to tell him that he might be suffering with something and that maybe this is something to look into, he would probably just think they were possessed. Let's be honest, he thought most people were possessed. But like I said, he felt like he had this gift when it came to kindoki, that he had this superpower to be able to tell who was affected and who was possessed. And this gift that he supposedly had only got more and more dangerous with time because he was starting to accuse and diagnose his friends and family of being possessed. Eric and Magali had a friend named Naomi Alonga who came to stay with them for about a week in 2009, and everything was going really well at first, as you would expect it to go when you're going to stay with your friend. That was until about day 2 of the trip when Naomi started biting her nails in front of Eric Bikubi, and I'm sure you can imagine how that went. Eric started freaking out, saying that she was possessed and that she'd brought this spirit into his home, and he was demanding that they all perform some kind of cleansing ritual on her right that second. But this cleansing ritual was more like straight up torture. For the next 3 days, Naomi Alonga was tortured in her friend's apartment by her friend and her boyfriend. Eric said that Naomi had to fast for the whole duration of the cleanse, so she wasn't allowed to eat or drink anything for about 3 days, and she was exhausted. She was very, very ill by the end of this. He wouldn't let her sleep as well. He was sleep depriving her as part of this cleanse, and although Eric Bikubi was the main perpetrator of this torture, Magali, Naomi's best friend, who she'd gone to stay with, was just standing there and watching as her boyfriend was torturing her best friend. Magali was quite a yes man to Eric Bikubi. That's probably not the way to put it, but anything that Eric said or did, Magali just went with it because, well, I don't know why. Why? Literally anything and everything he said, mainly about this kindoki stuff, Magali had never once believed in kindoki or had anything to do with kindoki until she met Eric. And then all of a sudden, as soon as he starts telling her all about these delusions, she is fully on board with him and this whole thing. So when he starts literally abusing her friend in front of her, she's fine with it because she also believes that her friend is possessed by kindoki, and she believes that it's what's best for her friend. Somehow. The couple would literally leave Naomi in one room. She's starved, she's thirsty, she's dehydrated, exhausted, she's terrified as well. And they would just go into the next room and just pray. Just pray as part of this cleansing ritual. She is starving. She is in so much pain, and they're praying for her. I think it's probably important to note around this time what Eric Bikubi's thought process was behind this cleansing ritual. So he didn't believe that, although he was torturing Naomi, he didn't believe that Naomi was being hurt in any way, because he believed that the spirit that was possessing her was the one that was feeling all the pain of the hunger, dehydration, sleep deprivation, all that. And he thought that that was the way to get the spirit out of Naomi, was by torturing the spirit. Of course, we know that she wasn't possessed by a spirit. He was literally just torturing Naomi Alonga. But that was Eric's beliefs. He thought that once someone was possessed by the spirit of kindoki, they were no longer in their own body to feel pain. And so whatever kind of cleansing rituals were required were going to take place. But anyway, this cleansing ritual continued, and they were literally acting like Naomi was diseased and contagious. Everything that she touched had to be thrown out because she was supposedly possessed by an evil spirit. And then on one of the last days that Naomi was in the house, Eric got an idea to be able to free her from the evil spirits that were inside of her. He said that they should cut off her beautiful long hair to about here. He said that that was the only way to get the spirits out of her. She had gorgeous long hair, and he cut it all about this short. She begged him not to. Of course she did. She begged him not to, but Eric was so stubborn in his beliefs that, like, there was no way that she could persuade him that her hair didn't have evil spirits in. He believed it, and he was cutting it off. After a few days of this torture, Naomi actually managed to find a phone inside the apartment, and she called her mother to come and rescue her from her best friend's house. Naomi was found absolutely traumatized, and I don't actually know if she ever went to the police about this. I couldn't find anything about an investigation or like a report into this, and I would think that something would be done into this if she did report it. And so without police being aware of what Eric had done to Naomi, he was free to just carry on in these beliefs. But after this incident with Naomi, Eric seemed to take a turn for the worse. Like, yes, he'd always struggled with his delusions, his schizophrenia, like hallucinations, all these kind of things, but he'd still been a decent person. He'd still been a good boyfriend to Magali. You know, he was still a normal guy outside of these kindoki beliefs that he was having. But it seemed that this 3 days that he'd spent torturing Naomi longer had given him a taste of power that he'd never had before. And he liked it. He liked having so much control and power over a human being. He'd always been a nice, caring boyfriend to Magali, but now Eric Bikubi was becoming a horrible, controlling man. He was very insecure, very jealous. He isolated Magali from her whole social life, and on the off chance that he did let her go out and meet her friends, she wasn't allowed to wear makeup because he was scared that other men would think she was too attractive. He also started chipping away at her self-esteem. He would criticize her for everything, call her names, insult her appearance, insult her intelligence. He would call her stupid and weak. This is how it all started. You know, these kind of smaller abusive things like chipping away at her self-esteem or not letting her have a social life. And over time, it just snowballed and snowballed and snowballed until he was making her eat off the ground like a dog. He wouldn't allow her basic things like a shower when she wanted one. You know, if she wanted a shower, she had to ask permission first, and it had to be at a time when he would let her. I don't know why he wouldn't let her shower sometimes, but sometimes he wouldn't. Things like having a drink. She would have to ask her boyfriend if she was allowed a glass of water. And sometimes she wasn't. Literally everything she did these days was determined or controlled by Eric Bikubi. She had to live her whole life by this man, and I think he found that control and that power just very entertaining. I think that was what he got out of it, was entertainment. But all of this was going on behind closed doors. No one had any idea that Eric was abusing Magali like this. They had no idea about the verbal abuse, emotional abuse, or even physical abuse in terms of not letting her have a drink and making her eat her food off the floor like a dog. No one had any idea that she was being treated like this. All her friends and family just thought that he was a great guy, because he was in the beginning. He was. He won everyone over in the beginning, including Magali. There was a reason that she liked him, because he showed this fake, nice guy front. And now that was gone, and the real Eric Bikubi was here. But in 2009, Magali actually managed to escape Eric and the abusive household that she was in. It happened after one particular argument one night when Magali refused to eat her food off the floor for once. Eric flipped out, he started beating Magali, gave her a black eye, and then later that night, she managed to sneak out of the house and run to a women's refuge shelter. She was finally safe. She was fed, she was given clean clothes, she was given a bed, she was allowed a shower whenever she wanted. You know, she finally had control over her life, and this was control that she hadn't had for so long. I imagine it was quite a weird experience, actually, going from being told when you can and cannot do everything to then being in this women's shelter and actually being able to eat when you want, or go and get a drink whenever you want, go to the bathroom whenever you want. It must have felt like a completely different world. Magali spent the next 3 months with that women's refuge shelter, and she was getting a lot of help from the team. They were putting things in place for her when she was going to leave the shelter so that she wouldn't have to go back to Eric or that life. But that wasn't going to last long, because after those 3 months in the shelter, Magali found herself right back with Eric Bikubi. Now, I don't know the circumstances surrounding this. I don't know if she voluntarily went back, or if he threatened her to come back, or if he somehow persuaded her. I really don't know. But unfortunately, she was back living with Eric. When the two of them got back together, they got an apartment together in North London. Actually, they moved around a lot, all over London. I think this links back to Eric's delusions somehow. I don't know what specifically about them made him want to move all the time, but I'm sure it was something about his beliefs. He was always on the run from something. He was always trying to be one step ahead of something. Magali, of course, never felt like she had a choice in the matter, and so every time Eric wanted to move, she had to move, and so she was constantly going all around London, and this constant moving around only made Eric's delusions 10 times worse, because the only person that he constantly had in his life was Magali. He had no one around him telling him that his delusions were getting worse, or that what he's saying is a load of crap. Like, he had no one around him to tell him that, and Magali wasn't going to tell him that because she was so scared of him. And so she was kind of a yes man to him, and so things did only get worse. Magali said that Eric was always acting like he was on some sort of mission, some sort of like righteous mission, that he was sent to Earth to kind of rid the Earth of evil spirits. I don't know, he thought he was here for some big reason, and that he was like the chosen one. It was all that was ever going on in his head. It was all that he ever talked about with Magali. Like, nothing else happened in this guy's brain, so you can imagine how bad the delusions were getting when it's all you think about. His whole entire life, his whole entire personality was just kindoki. He was in like a kindoki bubble, and nothing else was going on around him. So right now in the case, Eric Bikubi is probably the most dangerous he's ever been with these intensifying delusions, and it was only a matter of time until his actions intensified to the same level. And that time was about to come in 2010, when Magali invited round all of her family to come and stay with her and her boyfriend Eric over Christmas. Remember, her whole family still lived over in Paris, and so she didn't get to see them very often, so she thought it would be really nice to invite them all over so that they could all be together for the holidays. However, it wasn't going to be that easy, because her parents actually had work commitments in Paris on Christmas Day, so they couldn't travel, but all of Magali's siblings still wanted to go. They still wanted to go and see their sister for Christmas, and so their parents were like, fine, you can all go without us, and we'll come after Christmas and meet you all in London. So 5 of Magali's siblings were gonna travel over to London to come and stay with her, and then the parents were gonna come over a couple of days after Christmas, so they'd be there on maybe the 27th. As I said earlier on in the case, some of the siblings aren't named in the media, but I'll tell you the names and the information of the siblings that we do know. We only have the names of the 3 oldest siblings. The 2 youngest, their names are protected, but the oldest 3 were 22-year-old Eve, 20-year-old Kelly, and 15-year-old Kristy. So on December 16th, 2010, all 5 of these siblings hopped on a plane in Paris and flew over to London to go and see their sister. And for the first few days, everything was grand. Everything was lovely. They were enjoying their time with their sister. They were enjoying seeing London. This was the first time they'd ever been to London, so they were really excited. But then a few days into the trip, something happened that triggered Eric Bikubi's kindoki delusions. The thing that actually triggered him is debated. No one actually knows why he flipped on this particular day. We'll come back to some potential theories in a second. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he started accusing all 5 of Magali's siblings of being possessed by this kindoki spirit and bringing the evil spirits into his home. He was screaming at the kids, he was screaming at Magali, and as he was, they could see this rage just building up and building up and building up inside of him until he started to beat the children. And Magali, their sister, who invited them there in the first place, just stood and watched. She was actually very much in support of her boyfriend, because at this point, she also believed in all this kindoki stuff, and so she was siding with her boyfriend. She just stood and watched as her boyfriend beat up her siblings, one of which was autistic, three of which were children, and she just watched and let it happen. She didn't step in once. Like I said, no one really knows what triggered Eric Bikubi on this particular day. There's been some different theories. Some people say it could have been something to do with an allergic reaction that the oldest sibling had. Eves had eaten something, I think, and he had an allergic reaction. His bottom lip fully swelled up, like it was quite big. And Eric saw this as an evil spirit trying to get out of Eves's lip. I don't know either. All 5 of them insisted to Eric that they were not possessed, but he didn't believe them. In fact, it actually only made him believe it more because, like, of course, someone who's possessed is going to say, oh no, I'm not possessed. He knew that he needed to get these evil spirits out of his girlfriend's siblings. And so for the next 3 days, he proceeded to torture all 5 of them, just like he'd tortured Magali's best friend. And he was doing all the same things as before, starving them, dehydrating them, sleep depriving them, making them pray 24/7. But things were about to get much, much worse when Eric learned that 15-year-old Kristy had wet himself, which is supposedly one of the biggest symptoms of a kindoki possession in children. Some reports say that Kristy Bamu actually wet himself in the middle of the night before, because he was so scared to even get up and go to the bathroom. He was too scared that Eric was gonna flip out if he went to the bathroom, and so he wet himself, and then the following morning he tried to hide his underwear, but Eric eventually found it. And so Eric took this as a sign that 15-year-old Kristy Bamu was the cause of all the problems. He was the one that was possessed by these evil kindoki spirits. He was the one that Eric needed to deal with. And from this point on, pretty much all of Eric's attention is turned to Kristy Bamu. And he even starts turning his own siblings against him. And I just want to put a little warning in here before we continue on with the rest of the case, because from this point on, the torture is about to, like, step it up a whole other level. From this point on, there's going to be graphic details and explanations of, like, extreme physical torture. So graphic content ahead. Click out now if you don't want to hear about it. And I just want to emphasize before we carry on as well that Magali is not innocent in this case. She joins in with the torture. She is very much in support of her boyfriend. However, her links to this case are very, very complex. Remember, she too had been abused by Eric Bikubi for years now. And although that doesn't excuse her actions at all, it does give you a bit more insight into why she acted the way that she did. I think there's a lot to talk about when it comes to Magali's part in this case. It's not quite as clear-cut as, like, evil woman helps her boyfriend torture people, you know? Although, yeah, just to reiterate, she was very much involved and she was very much in support of what they were about to do to all of her siblings. And the lengths that Eric and Magali were going to torture this poor 15-year-old boy over the next few days were just absolutely horrific. They were using every weapon that they could get their hands on, every method of torture that they could possibly think of. Eric would beat Kristy with this metal bar that he found. He would beat him all over his body. But that wasn't all. He would actually take this metal bar, put it into Kristy's mouth, and this is horrifying. He would grab a chisel and a dumbbell and then smash it into his mouth, and it dislodged like a few of his teeth. And all the siblings would just have to watch as this man tortured their brother, and Kristy was telling Eric that it hurt so bad and that he wanted it to stop, but Eric didn't care, because think about what Eric thought this situation was. He didn't think that Kristy was even in his body anymore. He thought that it was an evil spirit in there. And so when Kristy, because it was Kristy, it wasn't an evil spirit, obviously, when Kristy was telling Eric that he was in pain and that he wanted it to stop, Eric saw that as a good thing, because the evil spirit that is possessing Kristy is in pain, and that's a good thing. So he only continued. He only got worse. As this child is begging him to stop, he only got worse. There was actually one point where Eric ordered all of the other siblings to pin down Kristy to the ground as Eric grabbed a bunch of loose bathroom tiles that they had. They were redecorating at the time. He grabbed all these loose tiles, went over to Kristy and just one by one smashed them over his head. And he had a lot of these tiles. He was just going and going and going with this. And after this particular incident, Eric realised that this was a very efficient way of abusing Kristy. If he could get all of the other siblings to pin him down, then, you know, he couldn't wriggle, he couldn't run away, he couldn't move. It made it a lot easier for Eric to abuse him. And so this became a regular thing. Every single day, he would order Kristy's siblings to pin him down while he tortured him in all these different ways. He'd beat Kristy with a hammer. There was this one particular time where Magali actually sent Kelly, one of the other siblings, to go and find a pair of pliers somewhere in the house. And when she returned with them, Magali ordered Kelly to twist Kristy's ear in the pliers. And Kelly was just horrified at the thought of this. She looked at her brother and how much pain he was in and how scared he was. And she remembered seeing how much blood was already on his t-shirt. And she just couldn't do it. Kelly tried to refuse. I mean, of course, she tried to get out of doing this to her brother. But Magali said to her that if she didn't, then she would do the same to her. And so Kelly picked up this pair of pliers, went over to her brother, and twisted his ear with them. But Magali still wasn't happy. She didn't think Kelly was doing it hard enough. She thought that she was going too easy on Kristy. And so Magali snatched the pliers out of Kelly's hands, went over to Kristy and twisted his ear in them as hard as she possibly could. And a lot of the punishments that Eric would give to Kristy, he would actually also give to the other siblings. Yes, Kristy was the main focus of the torture now, but that didn't mean that Eric was going easy on the other siblings. He was still abusing and torturing all of them as well. They were still being starved, dehydrated, sleep deprived. They were forced to pray all the time. He would still beat them occasionally. Just Kristy had it 10 times worse. Although the second oldest sibling, 20-year-old Kelly, she received quite a lot of the abuse as well. It seemed that the main target was Kristy, then it was Kelly, and then it was the other siblings. And I don't know for what particular reason he focused on Kelly so much. We know why he was focusing on Kristy, and that was because he wet himself, but with Kelly, it's not as clear why. Some people have theorized that maybe it's because she was kind of the leader of the group. She was kind of one of the oldest, and she was very much in control of the group at all times. She was kind of like the mum of the group. Obviously kind of the strongest one of the pack, and so a lot of people think that Eric was targeting her more just so that he could, you know, get her out of the way. Maybe. Even though she wasn't the oldest of the group, there was one sibling older than her, 22-year-old Eves, but he had autism and a lot of the time was cared for by Kelly. So she was kind of like the guardian for the group whenever they went anywhere. When they found out that they were traveling from Paris to London, Kelly was the one that was in charge of everything. Kelly was the one that was making sure everyone was where they needed to be, you know. So it makes sense that Eric would target her because she is the strongest one. She is the one that he needs to take out to be able to have full control over the group. With her, he particularly liked to choke her, hold a knife to her throat. I think a lot of the torture and abuse surrounding her was somewhat sexual, although there's no reports that he ever sexually assaulted or abused her in any way. But a lot of the things he did were kind of sexual in nature, which probably just tells you how he viewed Kelly, more like a sexual object. But going back to the torture of Kristy Bamu, because like I said, that was where most of Eric's energy went every single day, was torturing this poor child. He would smash glass bottles over Kristy's head. He would make him hold light bulbs in his mouth. So then he couldn't, his jaw would start to ache so bad because if he closed his mouth, that glass bulb would smash. That was exactly the point of the torture. Eric also particularly enjoyed mutilating Kristy. He would get a knife and do all these tiny little cuts and slashes all over his body and just mutilate the poor boy. He especially did a lot on his face as well, and so by the end of it, Kristy barely even looked like himself anymore. And this whole time, by the way, while he is torturing and abusing all of these children, Eric is repeatedly asking them over and over again if they are possessed by these evil spirits. And of course, every time the kids are saying, no, we're not. But that would only make things worse. He would only interrogate them and beat them even more when they said no. So I don't know what answer he wanted from them. And a lot of the time, as Eric was torturing and abusing 15-year-old Kristy, he would send all of the other siblings off, like, cleaning the apartment, just doing household chores and tasks. But a lot of them actually weren't just general housework, because think about what they were cleaning in that apartment. Most of it was their own brother's blood from the floors, from the walls, from different weapons. That was what they were cleaning. They weren't just doing the dishes. All the siblings said that there was just constant blood all over that apartment, all over the floors, all over the walls, every object, piece of furniture, because the abuse just, it never ended. It genuinely never came to an end. It was all day, all night, in every room. It wasn't stopping. And so the kids literally just couldn't clean the blood as quickly as it was being made. Every time they would finish cleaning one particular room, Eric would bring Kristy back in there and abuse him, and then there would be more blood to clean afterwards. By day 3 and 4 of the torture, all of the other siblings said that Kristy Bamu was literally begging his sister Magali, his older sister, who is supposed to love and care for him, he was begging her to just let him die. It was Christmas Eve at this point, and Eric Bikubi was growing bored of torturing Kristy because, I mean, at this point, Kristy was too exhausted to even react. I mean, in the beginning, he was screaming, he was crying, he was begging for them to stop, but now he was so starved and so exhausted and so beaten and so worn down that he wasn't doing anything anymore. Eric would hit him and he would get no reaction. And so it wasn't entertaining to him anymore. It was boring now. It took the fun out of it for Eric, which is an absolutely awful way to put it, but I think that's exactly what it was for him, fun. And I think it was no longer fun, and so he didn't want to carry on anymore. So at this point, he made a call to Kristy's parents, who, bear in mind, are still over in Paris, in a literal different country, and he said to Pierre that he needed to come and pick up his kids right away because they were all possessed by the spirit of kindoki. They'd brought evil spirits into his house. In fact, Eric told Pierre that if he didn't come and pick up his kids right now, then he was going to kill them. Their uncle was going to kill them. And when Pierre heard this on the phone, he didn't even know what to think. I mean, Eric sounded so serious. He did. He sounded like he was being genuine. Like he was going to kill those kids if Pierre didn't get there on time. But also at the same time, Pierre was telling himself, like, no, Eric could never do that. Surely not. He thought it was just some kind of empty threat. Maybe Eric had gotten really, really angry and he just made an empty threat because, I mean, the whole family knew Eric and trusted him and they thought he was a great guy. Remember, they had no idea that the abuse was going on behind closed doors with Magali. So this was the first time Magali's family had actually ever seen this side to him, so they didn't believe it. But like I said, the tone in his voice was just so serious that Pierre, like, he believed him. He believed that Eric would kill the children if he couldn't get there in time. And so Pierre started ringing round all these different rental car companies. Remember, they lived in Paris, and this was Christmas Eve. So there were no rental cars. There was absolutely no way for them to actually get over to London to be able to rescue the children. They were just going to have to wait until after Christmas. They had their flight booked for the 27th of December. They'd had it booked this whole time because they were going to go over and meet their family and have a great time. But now that flight seemed like it was going to be more like a rescue flight. That night on Christmas Eve, Kristy's siblings remember the look in his eyes. They described it as if he was already gone. He was going. He'd been exhausted for quite some time at this point, but on this particular day, I mean, it looked like he really didn't have long left. The next day was Christmas Day, December 25th, 2010, and On that particular day, Magali's downstairs neighbours in her apartment building heard a lot of commotion coming from her apartment. Loads of banging, loads of yelling. So they decided to report it to the building management because they didn't know what was going on, if it was a fight, if it was a party, if it was something. Either way, they knew it was disturbing them, and so they wanted someone to go and check on it. So the building management sent a plumber. I think it was just more to assess the situation because obviously a plumber's not going to be able to do much if there's a fight going on inside. He's not exactly the police, is he? But I think it was more just so that the plumber could go to the house and figure out if it was just a noisy neighbour being a bit too loud on Christmas, or if it actually needed further attention, like the police. So the plumber arrived at Magali's apartment and he just stood outside for a little bit. He didn't knock. He didn't put his ear to the door at the very least. Like, he literally just stood outside, listened, didn't hear anything, obviously, and then went away. Walked away. He didn't hear any yelling inside, and that was why he decided to just walk away. He did hear banging. He heard quite a bit of commotion, actually. But he said because there was no yelling, he didn't think anyone was, in danger or in pain or anything. He thought it must have just been some kind of building work, or maybe they were redoing the apartment somehow on Christmas Day. I don't know. Maybe that should have been a red flag that no one redoes their apartment on Christmas Day. But yeah, because he heard no yelling, he didn't think it was like a domestic situation or that anyone was in danger, so he left. Little did he know that all of that banging that he heard from inside the apartment was 15-year-old Kristy Bamu being tortured for the very last time. Eric Bikubi had dragged Kristy, along with a couple of his other siblings, into the bathroom for a ritual cleansing, like a bath, essentially. They'd done this quite a few times. It was to cleanse the evil spirits out of them or whatever. But by now, like I keep saying, Kristy was so exhausted and beaten and in so much pain that he could barely even hold himself up. He could barely even hold his own head up. He was constantly slumped or leant on something because his muscles just stopped working. So this ritual bath cleanse thing began, and Eric ordered all of the siblings to get into the bath. I don't think it was all of them, but all of the ones that were having the bath. He ordered them all to get in and he set the water running. And I think he left the room for a while, actually. And Kristy Bamu was so weak that his body just slipped into the water and he couldn't pull himself back out again. And he drowned on Christmas Day. After a few minutes, one of Kristy's sisters realised that his head had slipped under the water, and she alerted Eric to it because she couldn't actually reach him herself. So Eric came and lifted Kristy out of the bath, but it was too late. He'd already gone. Magali rang for an ambulance, and she actually told the operator that her little brother had drowned himself. However, when the paramedics arrived at the scene, they knew that obviously wasn't the case. They took one look at that apartment that had blood in every room, on every floor, on every wall, and they just knew that this death wasn't accidental and he hadn't drowned himself. And Eric and Magali hadn't even bothered to clean up the weapons when the paramedics arrived. There was a hammer still sat on the sofa with blood on it when they got there. There were knives everywhere, still with blood on them. Kristy Bamu's body was taken for an autopsy, and there it was found that he had sustained over 130 injuries throughout the past 4 days of torture. One of which was actually swelling to his brain. He'd been beaten that bad. In a forensic search of the apartment, they found tiny chunks of flesh and skin and hair all over the apartment, probably from all these different methods of torture, all these different weapons used on Kristy. Both 28-year-old Eric Bikubi and 29-year-old Magali Bamu were both arrested then and there at the scene on suspicion of the murder of Kristy Bamu. Eric actually pled guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter in court on the grounds of diminished responsibility due to his mental illness. Although he'd never actually been diagnosed with a mental illness, so I don't know how he thought that defense was going to work. They brought in a psychiatrist to assess him, but surprisingly enough, at the end of this meeting, they said they didn't think Eric Bikubi had anything wrong with him at all, which obviously came as a huge shock to everyone. Surely they must have got a second and third opinion. I couldn't see anything about one in my research, but surely. because, like, that's not the answer I was waiting for. I mean, I hope they got a second and third opinion, because that was shocking. Magali, on the other hand, in court, she was defending herself, saying that she had been forced to do her part in the murder by Eric. She was scared of Eric, and so she was doing everything that he was saying. But actually, all of her siblings, especially Kelly, you know, the 20-year-old Kelly who was like the second target of the abuse, she said that it was all rubbish, that Magali was lying. Kelly said that Magali wasn't innocent in the slightest. She was equally as fixated and obsessed with this kindoki stuff as Eric was. She was in support of torturing all of the siblings because she believed it, just like Eric did. In fact, she even told her siblings, as they were being tortured by her boyfriend, that they deserved it, because they were possessed by this kindoki spirit, or at least she said they were. Eventually, both Eric Bikubi and Magali Bamu were both found guilty of the murder of Kristy Bamu, and they were both sentenced to life in prison, Eric with a minimum of 30 years and Magali with a minimum of 25. But that is all I have for this case. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video. Remember, when you buy one gift card for an annual membership, you'll get another one completely free. So that's buy one, get one free. All you have to do to grab that deal is go through my link, which is down below in the description of this video. A huge thank you to all of my channel members for supporting me and helping decide the cases that I cover, especially my tier 2 members whose names are all on screen right now. If you want to become a channel member, you can click the link to do so in the description, or you can click the join button if you're on a desktop. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you'll probably also enjoy this one. I'm gonna pick you on specially, don't know why I said it like that. Also, if you enjoyed this video, you might want to subscribe, because I post videos like this all the damn time. Okay, bye bye.